Bulbuls Are Not Toys. A short story by Habib Mohana. His satchel bouncing gently against his back, Yahia, a fourth grader, was heading home when a sudden flutter of deep crimson feathers caught his eye. Curiosity slowed his steps, drawing him to a halt. Before him stood a boy holding a metre-long stick with a red-vented bulbul perched on it, one end of a thin cord tied around the bulbul's waist and the other secured to the stick. As the boy trotted, the bulbul shot into the air, its tiny wings beating rapidly in the golden sunlight as it followed the stick. When the boy stopped, it alighted gracefully back on the stick. Each agile leap into the air and each graceful landing filled the young owner with pride and a profound sense of ownership. Owning a bulbul was every boy's cherished dream. The joy of keeping such a clever, spirited creature was beyond measure. Proudly, boys would parade their birds through streets, bazaars and playgrounds like living trophies, the flash of scarlet beneath their dark plumage capturing every gaze. They all knew, of course, that the mosque and the school remained forbidden territory for their bulbuls. After roughly 2 weeks in captivity, the bulbul's owner would unfasten the cord from the stick, though it remained fastened around the bird's waist. Now fully trained, the bulbul would spring into the air at the slightest movement of the stick, its wings fluttering eagerly as it followed the stick, the loose end of the cord trailing beneath its belly like the crooked antenna of a toy airplane. Yahia arrived home, his heart pounding with a single, burning wish to have a bulbul of his own. "Please, Baba, can I get a bulbul?" he pleaded desperately. His father's voice was unyielding. "It's a cruel practice, son," he replied. "The birds suffer in captivity. They're not toys, they're living beings." Crushed, Yahia turned to his mother, begging her for money to buy a bulbul. But she only shook her head, saying, "I have none, my child." Unable to contain his sorrow, he threw himself onto the dusty courtyard floor, sobbing and rolling in boyish despair. He churned up a tiny dust devil, yet no one came to comfort him. The next day at school, Yahia joined his classmates as they chanted a poem about bulbuls. The textbook page depicted flowers in full bloom, lush foliage, and red-vented bulbuls, some captured in flight, others nestled in their nests, and still others perched on slender branches, their beaks parted in song. As the verses rose and fell around him, Yahia drifted into a waking dream, soaring alongside the bulbuls over the village orchards, warbling with them in harmony and flitting through the jamun trees in the dappled morning light. The following morning, Yahia slung his school bag across his shoulder and grabbed an 8-anna coin from his mother, then set out, not for school, but for his friend Harun's house. Together, they hid their school bags beneath a soft, rustling mound of wheat chaff in Harun's uncle's barn, then headed toward their wizened neighbour's orchard, stopping briefly at a neighbourhood shop to buy a handful of dried dates. Like shadows, the truants clambered over the 5-barred gate, moving with swift, stealthy precision, and crept toward a dense clump of guava trees, a corner favoured by bulbuls. Meanwhile, the solitary orchard keeper lay sprawled in his timber hovel at the orchard's centre, lost in the low hum of his vintage transistor radio, utterly oblivious to the young intruders trespassing on his domain. Around them, the orchard hummed with the liquid warbling of birds, while shafts of golden light dappled the grass in a shifting mosaic of amber and emerald. The boys settled onto a patch of soft grass. They plucked the pits from the dates and, after moistening the pulp with a generous amount of saliva, kneaded it into a thick, consistent paste. Harun pressed the paste onto the tip of a sturdy stick and carefully wedged the stick into the fork of a gnarled guava tree. Then they hid behind a nearby thicket, hearts pounding, holding their breath. After a while, 2 pairs of bulbuls wheeled overhead, their wings flashing silver-black in the sunlight before fluttering closer, lured by the sweet, tantalizing morsel. Before long, 1 pair of bulbuls alighted on the stick pecking eagerly at the sticky date paste. Concealed among the branches, the boys watched, eyes wide, hearts hammering wildly in their chests. "Perfect! At last the Bulbuls have found the date paste," Arun whispered, a gleam of victory in his eyes. "We'll let them feast on it for a couple of days, earn their trust, and then we'll snare them." When hunger began to pinch at their bellies, the truants remembered the dates tucked safely in their pockets. They popped the sticky dates into their mouths, relishing their rich sweetness, and laughed as they playfully pelted each other with the discarded pits. To wash down the sugary treat, they gulped cool water from a nearby stream, shaded by towering mulberry trees whose leaves rustled softly in the breeze. As early afternoon wore on, they set off towards home, only to run into a small band of classmates returning from school. "The teacher was furious with you," one boy said, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips. "Tomorrow, he's going to tan your hide," shouted another, waving his right arm with gleeful menace as though he already wielded the teacher's dreaded cane. "He'll make you do the murga and thwack your bums with his new boots," crowed a third, his voice crackling with cruel delight. The boys relished every thought of the truant's punishment and, if they could, would have dragged them straight to the schoolmaster's door. With the imagined swish of the green cane ringing in their ears, the truant's bums and palms seemed to burn, and their legs grew unsteady beneath them. Yahia grabbed his satchel from the barn and dashed home. Once inside, he tried to act normally, but his mother already knew of his truancy and refused to let him touch his lunch. To escape his father's wrath, he slipped back outside, wandering the streets aimlessly, each step fraying his nerves as the afternoon softened into dusk. Evening prayers had just ended at the neighbourhood mosque. His father sat on a date palm mat, tearing off pieces of chapati, dipping them into spicy curry from a clay bowl, and eating them, when Yahia, moving like a stealthy fox, tried to slip past. But his father's sharp eyes caught him immediately. He sprang to his feet, seizing Yahia by the throat and raining blows on him with fists and feet. Each strike landed with merciless accuracy, leaving the boy howling like a wounded coyote. When the beating ended, his mother approached with a water pot, gently urging him to wash his hands and face. But Yahia, still smouldering with humiliation and rage, kicked the pot aside, sending water splashing across the dirt floor in a silver arc. She asked him to lie down on his charpoy, yet he remained rooted to the spot, his shoulders trembling as he wept silently into his grimy elbow. Later, when she returned with a platter of food, the rich aroma curling towards him, he turned his face away, refusing to eat even a single bite. Gradually, Yahia's sobs ebbed into quiet hiccups as he lay curled on his charpoy. The quarrel with his father was behind him, but the fear of the school teacher still clung to his heart like a burr. In his mind, he could still hear it, the sharp swish of the freshly cut tamarisk cane, swinging down with pinpoint accuracy on his backside. Each imagined strike made him flinch, his body tensing at the thought of what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Yahia edged into class with the careful stillness of a wary cat, his eyes locked on the slender cane leaning against the teacher's rickety chair. Time seemed to stretch, each tick of the clock striking his stomach like the blow of a hammer. Fortune, it seemed, was on his side. The teacher had forgotten his absence from the previous day. When the bell rang for break, a few boys exchanged glances, whispering reminders of his truancy. But the teacher remained absorbed in conversation with his visitors. Still, tension coiled like a spring inside Yahia, his hands trembling, his heart racing a mile a minute. Only after the final bell rang, sending the boys spilling onto the calm, deserted street, did he let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. That afternoon, Yahia and Harun plucked long, sturdy hairs from the tails of cows plodding home from pasture. They sat by the dusty village lane, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, their fingers deftly twisting the freshly plucked hairs into small loops. delicate yet cunning snares, carefully crafted to catch unsuspecting bulbuls. On Sunday, the boys returned to the orchard, pressed a fresh ball of date paste onto the tip of the stick wedged in the guava tree, and carefully anchored their cow hair snares around the sweet bait. Concealed among the drooping foliage, they crouched in breathless silence, hearts hammering, eyes tracing every flicker of movement among the leaves. Every rustle, every distant chirp sent their pulses racing, each moment stretching unbearably as they waited for the unwary bulbuls to be caught in the fine, almost invisible loops. After what felt like an eternity, an unsuspecting pair of bulbuls alighted on the stick and began pecking at the date paste. The boys held their breath, tiny beads of sweat glistening on the tips of their small noses, eyes wide with anticipation. When the birds had eaten their fill, the female lifted off with a soft whir of wings. But as its mate spread its wings to follow, its right leg snagged sharply in one of the loops, trapping it instantly. The sudden tug flipped the male bulbul upside down. A startled cry burst from its beak, and a thick, pea-sized dollop spurted from its bottom, like the last stubborn bit of toothpaste squeezed from a tube. It swung like the pendulum of a grandfather clock, shrieking as its wings beat helplessly, while the boys let out a muffled cry of triumph. The boys darted toward the guava tree. Harun reached up to free the bird, its wings flailing against his hands, its beak snapping at his fingers. After a tense struggle, he loosened the snare and clamped his hand firmly around the trembling creature, its tiny body soft and warm, shuddering frantically against his palm. The boys' faces lit up with pure exhilaration. "I'm keeping this bulbul. Tomorrow we'll catch another one, and that will be yours," Harun declared, his voice taking on a crisp note of authority. Harun pulled a coarse woolen cord from his pocket and instructed Yahia to hold the bulbul's wings aside. With practiced hands, he looped one end around the bird's waist, tight enough to hold, but not to hurt, and tied the other end to a slender wooden rod. He coaxed the bird to perch on the rod, but it resisted, its talons clenched in defiance, its wings thrashing in frantic protest. After a brief, desperate struggle, it finally yielded, curling its claws around the rod. The bird looked bedraggled and misshapen, its spirit seemingly broken. Yahia's eyes lingered on Harun's catch with a quiet, burning envy. A fierce wish thumped in his chest. They should have caught 2 bulbuls, or none at all. Harun asked his friend to hold the stick with the bulbul perched on it while he went over to the guava tree to close all the snares. "We need to take care of these snares," he said. "Otherwise, a bird could get trapped and die." As they left the orchard, Harun skipped along, chattering with elation, his voice bright with unbridled joy. Yahia trailed behind, his steps heavy, his mind clouded by a secret gnawing resentment, harbouring a dark wish that Harun's bulbul would somehow escape, be snatched away by an older boy, or simply perish. The next day, after school, the boys returned to the guava tree in the orchard. They placed a fresh ball of date paste atop the stick, reset the snares, hid among the bushes, and waited in silence for the bulbuls to return. But the wary birds ignored the bait as if it didn't exist at all. Once again, Yahia's longing for a bulbul went unfulfilled. With Harun away at his grandmother's house, Yahia ventured into the orchard alone the following afternoon. The oppressive stillness was broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the forlorn cries of birds hidden deep within the trees. Without Harun beside him, the orchard seemed vast and strangely unwelcoming. Long, slanting shadows stretched across the ground, sending a quiet unease through his heart. But he gathered his courage and pressed on till he reached the guava tree. He carefully reopened the snares and crouched in the usual hiding place. Yet again, the bulbuls avoided the bait. A little before sunset, disheartened and empty-handed, Yahia slunk home, forgetting in his disappointment to close the snares. The following day, Harun and Yahia skipped school and headed for the orchard. So lost were they in talk of bulbuls that they didn't realize they had reached the guava clump until they froze in their tracks. A white-cheeked bulbul hung lifeless from a snare, its delicate neck caught tightly in a loop. Harun pulled the bird free. It was stiff and dry, like a small piece of jerky. He turned it over in his palm, inspecting it from every angle, then flicked it into the tall grass with a sharp, disgusted jerk of his wrist. "You killed it, you idiot!" he shouted. "You should have closed the snares!" With that, he turned on his heel and strode away from the orchard. Yahia gently lifted the lifeless bird and cradled it in his palm, yearning for a sprinkle of magic, some miracle that would breathe life back into it. Tears welled in his eyes as he gazed into the bird's stiff, glassy eyes. It felt as though a cloud of furious bulbuls hovered above him, chirping and shrieking like vengeful spirits, as if the guava tree itself might shudder to life, its limbs coiling like snakes to crush him for his crime. He slipped the dead bird into his pocket and bolted from the orchard. As evening fell, his father spanked him for skipping school, but Yahia felt no pain. His mind was consumed by the image of the dead bulbul hanging limply from the guava tree. That night, when his father began to snore, Yahia quietly pulled the lifeless bird from his pocket as he lay on his charpoy and placed it on his chest, its head turned toward his face. He traced his fingertips over its tiny head and back, smoothed its tail feathers, and gently pinched its beak, the way a mother might gently pinch her child's nose. He was still stroking its cool, soft back when sleep finally claimed him. That night, Yahia dreamed that the dead bulbul had come back to life, its wings fluttering gently, filling the air with soft, fluting notes. The bird perched on his shoulder as he walked to school, light as a rose petal, warm and alive against his cheek. On the way, he bought a cupcake from the shop, broke it into tiny pieces, and fed the pieces to the bulbul, laughing softly each time the eager little beak pecked one from his palm. His heart felt so buoyant that his feet nearly danced beneath him. When he reached school, his classmates gathered around him, their eyes wide with amazement. They ached to touch the bird, to feel its feathers, but Yahia held it close against his chest. The bulbul began to sing, a sweet, airy tune that hushed the entire schoolyard into spellbound silence. A new day dawned, crisp and radiant, and Yahia woke with a smile, instinctively reaching for his bulbul. His hand met only the rough weave of his date palm mat. Startled, he searched beneath his pillow, then scrambled to peer under the charpoy, but the bulbul was nowhere to be found. "Must be the work of a cat," his mother said, gesturing towards the few delicate feathers strewn across the courtyard. She placed his breakfast before Yahia, but he hardly noticed. Instead, he prowled through the rooms, scouring every corner, his eyes burning with fury. Finally, he climbed onto the roof, hoping to find the mischievous creature dozing in some cool corner. "Don't be silly," his mother called up. "You think the cat's just waiting to get caught and thrashed? Come down and have your breakfast. You'll be late for school." Reluctantly, he climbed down and settled on the mat. A sharp, sickening smell drifted up from the food as he reached for his plate. He tore off a piece of paratha and put it in his mouth, but it felt as though he were chewing a mouthful of feathers. His stomach churned violently. Pushing the plate aside, he stumbled toward the bathroom, retching uncontrollably.